men are accusing Sean Diddy Combs of sexually assaulting them at various locations, and they are going after the music executive and his companies. We've got our hands on the filings to examine the latest allegations, and we are speaking directly with their attorney. Welcome to has filed 3 new complaints with the New York Supreme Court this week on behalf of 3 John Does, these unidentified men. And you might remember, actually, that Joy Dickerson-Neal, one of the women who alleged that Combs and his associates had assaulted her back in the 90s, she filed her lawsuit in that same courtroom back in 2023. Now, the 3 lawsuits here, they lay out different attacks at different locations, 2 at hotels and 1 at Combs' home. Now, of course, allegations have been piling up against Sean Combs, this disgraced rapper, over the past year. And despite him settling what was reportedly a multi-million-dollar lawsuit with his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, other than him admitting, or seemingly admitting, it was him in that 2016 videotape that was released by CNN of him purportedly beating Ventura in a hotel hallway, he really hasn't admitted to anything. He has said that he is innocent of all of this. And by the way, he is innocent until proven guilty. He hasn't been found guilty of any crime related to this sex crimes investigations, and he also hasn't been found liable in any of the complaints that have been filed against him in the past year. And as I said, he's facing these federal criminal charges right now out of the Southern District of New York, where prosecutors accuse him of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, transportation to engage in prostitution. He was arrested in September. He's tried for bail 3 times in front of multiple judges. He's been denied every time. But the big picture here is that Sean Combs' parties, his events, are infamous. And it seems to have been almost an open secret in the entertainment world that his parties would get wild, but most A-listers, they have been willing to comment on the specifics of what was going on over the years. But as these civil actions have been filed, we are learning about alleged assaults against non-celebrity guests at these events. Because in these 3 new lawsuits, we are talking about 3 people who are alleging very similar conduct, and they are filing under the same causes of action: violation of New York City's Victims of Gender-Motivated Violence Protection Law, sexual assault, sexual battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligence, and negligent hiring, retention, supervision, and/or direction. We're going to get to those causes of action a little bit more. Hey, by the way, I have been so nonstop with so much breaking news in this Diddy case that my life has been a little bit hectic. But I actually have this app that makes the day-to-day rewarding. That's the key word, rewarding, because it's called Upside. So get this, when I buy gas, groceries, food, my daily essentials, I could potentially get cash back using the free Upside app. Real cash back, money that appears in your Upside app that you transfer right into your bank account. Look here, I used Upside to find a gas station. I claimed an offer, pay with my credit card at the pump, follow the steps on the app. I got cash back. It is so simple to use, and you can use it at all different kinds of places, restaurants, convenience stores. So to find out how much you can earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen, and make sure to use our promo code SIDEBAR, and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. First, I just want to dig into the specifics of these lawsuits. So the first one involves a John Doe who was living in Florida at the time he says he was attacked. Now, the verified complaint names the defendants as Sean Combs and several of his companies: Bad Boy Entertainment Holdings, Bad Boy Productions Holdings, Daddy's House Recordings, and Sony Music Holdings. You go after the companies that got the deep pockets. Now, it reads, this complaint is based on the negligent, willful, or intentional failure of the defendants to protect plaintiff John Doe from being sexually abused and exploited by defendant Sean Combs when John Doe was attending a party at Sean Combs' residence. Now, according to John Doe, in the summer of 2020, one of Combs' associates from Bad Boy Records had invited him to Sean Combs' home in the Hamptons for a party. So he ends up flying from Florida to New York. And the day of the party, one of the Bad Boy associates reportedly picked him up and took him to the home where he, along with other people, were drinking. And John Doe says that he started feeling sick and losing consciousness almost immediately. This is an allegation that we have seen time and time again in these lawsuits, claims that Combs allegedly added drugs to people's drinks to make them not only unable to consent, but also maybe potentially unable to escape. So John Doe says that he faded in and out of consciousness for the rest of the night, but then he awakes. And he awakes at one point to allegedly find Combs and his associates essentially taking turns assaulting him. And when he wakes up fully the next day, he says that he was surrounded by people from Bad Boy, but Combs wasn't there, and he left. The complaint says out of fear and humiliation, plaintiff never told anybody about the aforementioned incident until now. So that kind of gives you an understanding of why it wasn't reported until now, although I'll get to that in a little bit. The second lawsuit that was filed this week is from a New York man who said he met Combs at the Marquee nightclub in New York. So John Doe here says that he was friends with a club promoter who has these connections to the music industry, and that's how he was able to meet such a high-profile celebrity like Sean Combs. The complaint reads, around midnight, defendant Sean Combs' security guards recruited plaintiff to join Sean Combs and the rest of his entourage at the Park Hyatt Hotel for an exclusive after-party. Plaintiff then joined defendant Sean Combs and about 10 other people from Bad Boy Records at Sean Combs' hotel suite within the Park Hyatt, New York. Now, that is an interesting thing to note here because the Park Hyatt, New York is actually where Combs was staying when he was arrested in September. Do we remember that? His lawyer said that he had traveled to New York to turn himself into the police, but according to them, they jumped the gun and arrested him the night before at his hotel. There was even surveillance footage of that. Well, John Doe says that when he gets to this hotel, Combs goes into another room and he comes back with a cocktail, and he gives that cocktail to John Doe. Quote, soon after, defendant Combs started ushering his guests, including plaintiff, into the bedroom within the hotel suite. During this time, plaintiff had consumed about half the drink that defendant Combs made for him. Once plaintiff entered the bedroom, the room started spinning and his mouth became very dry. Plaintiff voiced to defendant Sean Combs that he wasn't feeling well, so defendant Sean Combs offered to take plaintiff's jacket and instructed plaintiff to sit down on the end of the bed, which plaintiff did. While plaintiff was sitting on the bed feeling disoriented, defendant Sean Combs looked at him and the other people in the room and said, he is ready to party. Now that is especially chilling because that is almost the exact same thing that Combs allegedly said to a 13-year-old girl in 2000 that he is accused now in a separate lawsuit of raping, that this happened at a Video Music Awards after party. By the way, that same lawsuit also now accuses fellow rapper and media icon Jay-Z of participating in this rape, this sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. And by the way, there's an allegation that there was this unidentified female celebrity who watched the whole thing. Going back to the lawsuit here, the John Doe in this lawsuit also reports going in and out of consciousness, but awakening to find himself naked with Combs on top of him. And he says he tried to resist, but he couldn't. The complaint reads, during this brief moment of consciousness, plaintiff noticed that while he was being sexually assaulted by defendant Sean Combs on the sectional sofa, there was a man and a woman sitting on the bed recording the rape on a camera. It continues, when plaintiff awoke the next morning, the two people with the camera were laying on the bed, but defendant Sean Combs was no longer there. Plaintiff then began putting his clothes on when the man who was laying on the bed got up and handed plaintiff about $2,500 in cash, which the man explained was being given to plaintiff on behalf of Sean Combs. Disoriented and confused, plaintiff accepted the money, got dressed, and vacated the hotel suite. The third lawsuit was also filed by another New York man who says that he was assaulted at the Intercontinental Hotel in 2020 after working for Sean Combs for years. According to the complaint, plaintiff met defendant Sean Combs in about 2006 when Sean Combs hired plaintiff to run errands for him in his capacity as CEO of Bad Boy Records. In or about February 2020, plaintiff set up a meeting with defendant Sean Combs through Combs' assistant to discuss missing job payments. And that meeting was at the Intercontinental New York, which, by the way, has been mentioned before in another Sean Combs lawsuit, because according to Cassandra Ventura, that was actually the site of a freak-off in 2013 that ended with Combs being charged tens of thousands of dollars in damages by the hotel. So going back to this lawsuit, during this meeting with Sean Combs, John Doe alleges that he was alone with the Bad Boy CEO, and this was after security had left the room. Combs, according to him, reportedly made the two drinks. John Doe started to get really tired, claims Combs suggested lie down, take a nap, and he says when he woke up, Sean Combs was assaulting him. Again, very consistent pattern in these allegations between all three men. According to the complaint, after this rape, defendant Sean Combs told plaintiff that going to the police will make plaintiff, quote, look like an idiot, and that because Combs is Diddy, plaintiff would never be able to substantiate his claims against Combs. He also claims that men from defendant Sean Combs' entourage also called plaintiff on his cell phone to threaten and intimidate plaintiff into silence after the sexual assault. So again, these lawsuits have been filed against not only Combs, but also his companies, which the John Does argued they were responsible for knowing what the rapper was up to and failing to do anything to stop it, that they helped provide the means for Combs to keep up this alleged misconduct. All right, so I am joined right now by the attorney who is representing these three men suing Sean Combs. Thomas Gifford joins us right now. Thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question I had when I saw this, and it's a question I have a lot when you're seeing a number of these Sean Combs lawsuits coming out, is why file now? Why come forward now with these claims?
Well, it's in a lot of cases when you have serial sex abuse like this or any kind of a sexual assault, it's very difficult for the victims to come forward. There's a lot of shame, there's a lot of embarrassment, and in Sean Combs's case is a lot different in that all three of my victims after the assault were all threatened. So there was a very real threat and fear that something bad could happen to them if they came forward. And I think once everything became public, there's strength in numbers. And when they saw that they would be safe, they felt comfortable coming forward and seeking to hold him accountable for what he did to them.
Did they ever, either now or at some point in the past, did they ever report this to police?
No, did not.
Do they want to report it to police now?
I think the problem with going to law enforcement is the amount of time that's gone past is significant. And the criminal world, as you know, works different than the civil world. I suspect there's concerns about involvement with the police, and they just would prefer to go the civil route.
Now, look, obviously, this is going to be decided in a court of law if it should go to trial. But obviously, this is making the news. And there are people who could look at this and say, this is now just three new lawsuits on top of the pile of other lawsuits that he's facing. How does someone in the public know whether one claim is more valid than another? So for those who out there who might be skeptical and say, oh, these are three more people that are jumping on the Sean Combs bandwagon, how would they separate these cases from the other ones that have been
Well,
found? What about this? You would say, listen, take a beat with this one. This is one that you should really pay attention to.
Well, I think with any serial sex abuser, there's a pattern. And I was involved in the Harvey Weinstein case, and Harvey Weinstein followed a very clear pattern of how he abused people. And in Sean Combs's case, with each of these men, he followed the exact same pattern, and they wouldn't know the pattern to have it so consistent. And as I've said before, I've talked to a lot of people with potential Sean Combs cases, and they didn't know the pattern. The stories didn't make sense. Oh, you get a pretty good nose for what makes sense when you're in my businesses for 30 years of whether somebody's making something up, and if you get that sense or it tingles just a bit, you don't want to proceed with it because it's your reputation on the line.
Sure.
Because on these kinds of cases, there's there's probably a videotape somewhere of one of these assaults, but I'm sure as heck not going to get it. And there isn't going to be that kind of evidence. And there really never is. I don't want to say never because I recently had one case, and I've been doing this for at this point 25 years, where I had a letter of apology that went to one of my clients. So that was a first for me, and I almost fell off my chair when I saw it because usually you have the denial or you have it was consensual. It's one of those two. It's never I did it, with the exception of this one case that shocked me.
And by the way, I saw you in your interview with Chris Cuomo last night on News Nation, where you said, these are three independent cases. These are people who didn't know each other. Their accounts were so similar. And I will tell you, after reading the three complaints, I got confused as to who was who because they were so consistent in their stories. And
That's the thing.
Yeah. Now,
That's
here's
right.
the question. You mentioned something, the evidence. What additional evidence do you have or you hope to get during the course of this case to prove their claims, other than their own accounts of what happened? You mentioned, I believe there was a potential videotape of one of these alleged assaults. So talk to me about what evidence you're hoping to have or have.
Well, I think realistically that videotape is now sleeping with the fishes, as they say. I will never see that videotape. It will never see the light of day. And a lot of this comes to the credibility of the people who are giving the testimony. And I found all three of these men to be extremely credible, very consistent. As you can see, they're all from different parts of the country, so they didn't know each other. They didn't run in the same circles, and there was a certain randomness to how the stories became so consistent. And I thought that was pretty striking. And then you have to look at the evidence that you have outside of this. Now, certainly it doesn't come into this individual case, but you get a pretty good sense of how Sean Combs operates based on just the video you saw with Cassie, his ex-girlfriend. I mean, that's not a normal person. That's not somebody who treats somebody with respect. It's not shocking for me that somebody like that could do what happened in this case.
By the way, why did you file these in New York State court? A lot of the cases that we have seen so far against Sean Combs have been filed in federal court. Now, I will say that a lot of those alleged victims were not from New York, so they're from a different state. There's that, and because they're from different states, and they're suing for obviously more than $75,000. That's how subject matter jurisdiction gets triggered, how they can file in federal court. But I believe at least one of your clients is from Florida. So was there a strategic advantage to go to a state route as opposed to a federal court?
Well, jurisdiction's proper in state court in every single case because the assaults all took place in New York. At the time of the assaults, all of the defendants were New York residents. Federal court is really designed to protect out of state residents from getting a disadvantage for being a defendant in a foreign venue. So that's one reason. It's a personal preference for me. I prefer state court. I think I prefer the system in state court to federal court. It's just a personal preference, really.
Well, two questions I had about the counts, the causes of action that you're filing under. Some of them are very straightforward, with respect to what Combs allegedly did. But one of the things that you are filing under, and we've seen this before in other Combs cases, is the Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act against
Right.
Sean Combs, and also the causes of action against the companies. Can you explain the theory behind the Gender Motivated Violence Protection Act count, and also going after the companies, how you plan to hold them liable?
Well, I think let me gender motivated violence. The cases are timely under the New York State statute of limitations, so we're okay with that. But we always allege the city causes of action, which is a gender motivated violence, which basically is the same claim as a state claim, but it's just unique to the city of New York. And we just as a pattern and practice of what we do is we always plead it. As far as holding the companies in one of my clients worked for his companies. I think there's the role of to distinguish between Sean Combs and his various entities is very difficult because it's not the typical corporation where there's a real hierarchy, a corporate type of setup. It's more his companies under him, and he's calling all the shots. And a lot of these events were mixed into the dealings of his companies.
Let me ask you this. I mean, from a practical point of view, he's facing multiple lawsuits. He's facing criminal charges. The legal bills are racking up. He has a lot of these civil suits. Do you go after the companies too? Because if you're actually successful in this case, is a better chance of recovering from if you go after the companies?
Probably. I think Sean Combs is different than say a Harvey Weinstein who maybe didn't have the independent financial wherewithal. And I suspect Sean Combs probably has done a lot of things through the years to protect his money from the consequences.
One of the things I was thinking about with this case was potential defenses. And I imagine there's a consistent line you talked about the alleged drugging and alleged sexual assault. Would an argument be for the defense, well, if these John Does claim that they were uh, drugged to the point where they can't quite, they were in and out of consciousness, how can they properly know what happened to them? How can we trust their accounting of events? What would be the response to that?
I think my response would be that most people who are coming out of being roofied and are being raped would know.
There you go. Okay, so let me ask you this then. You mentioned, I know you've said that over 60 people have reached out to you to represent them, and you chose these three individuals. And as you mentioned, it's because their stories were very consistent, and they were backed up, and you have faith in these stories. My question to you is, do you know if these three individuals that you're representing, did they reach out to any other lawyers? Is this the first time that they wanted to take legal action and went to you?
It was the first time they wanted to take legal action.
Yeah, and I have to imagine this is not easy, even though they are currently John Does. They're not being identified. But as you know, with a lot of the other Combs cases, he has been fighting, and Jay Z's doing the same thing now, fighting to have these Jane and John Does their names exposed, and they can no longer proceed anonymously. Now, Sean Combs has actually been successful with some of those cases. He's made arguments that, look, I'm being sued. They made a voluntary decision to sue me. I have a right to challenge them. I have a right to know who they are. What would be your response back if there is that legal challenge in this case?
Well, he'll know who they are as they proceed anonymously. It's nonsense, the argument they're raising that it's some mystery person they won't know. But my argument primarily would be these guys have all been threatened with credible threats. It's different than in a lot of cases where you have the usual exposure to being a victim of a sexual violence. Here you have like a triple whammy. You have exposure to as a victim of sexual violence. You're a man who's been raped, and then you have a man who's a victim of sexual violence who's received credible threats of harm. Those are good reasons to keep your name out of the paper and out of the public eye, I think.
If they had to reveal their identities, if the court ordered them to reveal their identities, do you think your clients would want to continue on with the case with their names being public?
Well, I mean, the whole reason they want their names public is to intimidate them so they won't proceed. And I think that's the tactic that's being followed in this case and others. I can tell you in the cases, for example, you may have heard about, Dr. Padu. Those cases, as a matter of course, the defendants in those cases have a stipulation where they'll permit the victims to proceed anonymously because they're trying to do the right thing. In this case, when they try to expose people, it's to intimidate them, it's to scare them. It's like, hey, wait a second, now the world's going to know I got raped by Sean Combs, I got threatened by Sean Combs, and it's a way to silence them. And you see it in their tactics. I mean, I saw yesterday when this became public, there was some statement about unethical lawyers and all this stuff.
I'll
And
read
I've
you
been
it.
a lawyer
I'll
for
read you
30
it. I'll read
years.
you it. Read
Yeah.
it to you. So this was a statement put out by Combs' attorneys. It says these complaints are full of lies. We will prove them false and seek sanctions against every unethical lawyer who filed fictional claims against him. So your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction to that is, what are they going to do? They're trying to silence the victims, then they're trying to silence the lawyers. For me, I've been a lawyer for 30 years in the city of New York. I've handled cases against Harvey Weinstein. I've handled cases against Dr. Hayden. I currently have 30 cases against Dr. Paduk. My reputation is unimpeachable. I've had 60 people call me up with cases. I took 3 cases because I take my reputation very seriously and I don't go randomly accusing other lawyers of being unethical. But the one thing I can tell you is I believe these gentlemen, what they're telling me is true. I didn't have that same confidence in the 57 cases that I declined to represent somebody because my reputation matters.
That's very fair. Completely understand that. And look, there's another lawyer who's representing several accusers, Tony Busby. He said that his firm got 3,000 calls and he only selected, 100. I say only, but it selected a lot of them. And look, I totally get that. Just to go back to that question, though, Anna Kane is one of the Sean Combs accusers who had to reveal her identity. She didn't want to. But she said, "I'm going to proceed forward with this case, even though now I've been identified." Again, would your clients would they? I mean, maybe it's too early, but if you had a conversation with them, do you know if they would continue to proceed with this case if their identities have to be revealed?
I haven't had that conversation.
Yeah.
So, one of the reasons I prefer state court is I think the state court is a little more um, advanced as far as the anonymity of victims of sexual abuse. I think the federal courts are not as advanced as we are in New York State. Um, so, no, I haven't had that conversation.
This might be a little sensitive. I know you might not be able to answer it, but I have to ask it nonetheless. Can you say any which way whether or not your clients have been working with the feds on the criminal case against Sean Combs? Have they been contacted
I
at
can
all?
tell you no. I can tell you no. None of them are.
Well, the reason I ask is when I read these complaints, they're very consistent with the allegations put forward by federal prosecutors, and that's why I was curious about it.
No, no, no. I can tell you that with there, none of them are involved in the criminal case.
So where does the case go from now, if you could tell us? So you filed these complaints. What happens next?
Well, I suspect what will happen is what happens in all these cases. He's currently under indictment. He's currently he can't be forced to testify. In the civil process, he was required to testify. I suspect there'll be an answer. There'll be a motion for a stay until the outcome of his criminal case, and everything will sit in a holding pattern, which is what happened with the Darius Paduk cases. And then once he's either, well, I suspect he'll be convicted, then the cases will proceed. But that's really what I would see in the next 6 months. But I think it's going to be a whole hurry up and wait while the criminal case works its way through the system.
Thomas Jiffer, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. I wanted to speak to you about this right as it's fresh as it's happening. I'm sure your phone is ringing constantly after the filing of these 3 complaints. So really
Yeah, more than normal.
Yeah, I wonder why. But no, seriously, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it.
All right, nice meeting you. Take care. Have a good holiday.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. We'll speak to you next time.